Thank you very much for being here, for listening to me, and thank you for the invite. I actually should correct that. I'm not going to be talking about how CBD is the new black, because I firmly believe it isn't. In terms of cosmetics, exactly. It's green. It's green already. And also, there's a lot of stuff going on in cosmetics with CBD. And I will speak about CBD cosmetics, but even that as a term is very strange when you come from the cosmetics industry, because it is really an ingredient. It's an ingredient. It's an active ingredient. It's very interesting. But I don't think that CBD cosmetics are the new black. I think they can be a segment of a line. They can be a few products in a line, and they can be very much a growth factor, or a growth a segment, but not necessarily the new black. So I'm sorry I didn't change the title before. It's going to be very basic: cosmetic hemp and cannabinoids. And I just want to apologize in advance, because I think I have the least aesthetic slides of the whole conference, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to be talking a lot, and there are very few pictures, so I hope that I don't put you to sleep. Just a little summary. I'm going to be myth busting today, and I wouldn't call it whistleblowing. I'm not naming any names, but I do think that there are some things that need to be known in the industry, because we have a lot of CBD oil paradigms shifting over the CBD to the cosmetic space, and they're quite detrimental to many factors on cosmetics, and I think CBD and the acceptance of CBD as a cosmetic ingredient. Cann, often people say, what does Cann do? And I know, as Sebastian just said, we do cosmetics. We have quite a few activities. I'm very much on the cosmetics side. Philippe, who's the first one on the top left, runs and owns a cosmetics lab, GMP cosmetics lab, which is all cosmetics in Europe are GMP, but in the south of France. So that was kind of naturally our first activity. We have branched out with different projects, and I'd love to get into those, but it would take a few hours. So I will keep going. But I think that my position today is quite, in general, maybe in this industry, is quite unique, because I entered into the CBD space and the cosmetic space at the same time. I'm not at all from cosmetics. It was not a passion of mine. Cannabis was a passion, still is. But I'm not from that field either. I had a construction company in France for 10 years, and before that I was in international business, and I love making startups. I love being an entrepreneur. So when I discovered cosmetics, it was a huge blow to what I thought were cosmetics, which I thought were much easier to get on the market, much more of a fluffy thing. And in Europe, cosmetics are more like a light version of, very light, but light version of pharma in terms of the process to get one on the market than they are food. And also the CBD space, which I absolutely love, and I saw it grow, and I've been in here for about 4 years. So I think I can understand really where the kind of bottlenecks and the friction points are between the two worlds, and I'd like to bridge the gap. So the good news is that theoretically it should be very easy to bridge the gap, because cosmetics are not like CBD oils. CBD cosmetics are not like CBD oils, and even cosmetics are not like food supplements, in that they're highly regulated. Cosmetic ingredients are very specific. We can't go for just kind of what comes on the market and consistent materials. It's not possible. Some cannabinoids are permitted, but it's very clear. The law is very clear around it. I think a big reason that people did not necessarily comply to the law, and this is what I'll explain, there are a lot of products on the market that are not nearly half tested, that do not comply with EU regulations, and are essentially potentially giving a bad name to CBD in cosmetics and our space. And the other thing is that the CBD products, that doesn't differ. So it's a food supplement with CBD becomes a novel food, but a cosmetic with CBD does not become anything else. It really remains a cosmetic in the sense of the true sense of the term. Once the full process is done for a cosmetic, and I'll get into the process right away, it can be sold across Europe. So this is the free good exchange of goods, but also just that even in most of the rest of the world, the EU is what we call a mieux disant. So we have much more strict and stringent criteria, so that usually will pass in the rest of the world. For South America, for example, we just need one of the tests that we do now to get the products on the market. And for the US, we won't even discuss yet. So why does it seem like it's grey? There are some factors. And there really are. I just want to mention this. I think about 80% of the products on the European market that are cosmetics with cannabinoids are not compliant. So that might come as a shock, because we kind of just see all these products on the market on many different sites. A lot of them come from the US, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all, but they are not at all exempt from these regulations. So some of the contributing factors, evolution of coasting, I'll get into that. The presence of these, so often people will say, well, I see products on the market that have these criteria that I will talk about, full spectrum, for example, or it's 15% CBD. but that's not a reason to go for it. So we do have to kind of break that down. And the other thing, of course, is the banking, payment, and marketing complexities that just kind of add a bit of a gray tinge, because even though I'm focused on CBD, the CBD space, we also formulate cosmetics for the cosmetic space using CBD. So we're introducing CBD to them, and all of a sudden, regular cosmetics brands can see their whole line be completely removed from Stripe, or they didn't realize that there are so many kind of marketing complexities around the CBD. So that's one thing. But I think the main problem is that the CBD oil segment paradigms have leached into the cosmetics, and that's when I'll bust the myth. But to begin, we'll just go through the regulation. What is a cosmetic product? This also might come as a surprise. Coming from Canada, I always thought of cosmetics kind of as mascara and some creams. It really goes we're going even to the external genital organs, teeth, mucous membranes, anything that's really changing the appearance, keeping the cleanliness of the body and also the appearance yes. So manufacturer. I wanted to put these three things on the bottom here because manufacturer, often people will think it's the actual person who's manufacturing. Manufacturer actually essentially means the brand. So it's the person who's manufacturing who has the products manufactured for them. They will be considered the manufacturer in Europe. The distributor, and this becomes very important a little bit later, is the person that's either that is distributing the products, or a retailer or a distributor. But it can also be the importer. So that becomes also important. With making available on the market I want to make a little point on this, because it's not only when you sell a product, it's also when you give it away for free as samples. So that really is important, and I'll touch on that. So the basic structure, to give you an idea of the cosmetics regulations, it is, I'm not sure how many pages it is, I've read it about twice. It is very complete. So you have the preservatives, the UV filters that you can use. You have the permitted pigments. You have positive lists, and you also have negative lists. To give you an idea, the negative lists of restricted ingredients in Europe is something like 1,500 ingredients. In the US, for example, it's about 7. So it's huge. There are 7 groups, and it doesn't mean, I'm not saying at all that US cosmetics are not good. There are a lot of brands lobbying for real regulations in the US, but it's a completely different game. So that's where we come from, the claims criteria as well. So any product that is sold within the European Union has to go through these tests and analyses that I'll explain to you before being notified, and it's a huge dossier is created and available on the territory, and imported products are no exception. So what I saw at the beginning, about a few years ago, I had a lot of clients coming in saying, I'd like to formulate products, but for now I'm just importing for them from the States. And that seems like, in the CBD world, that seems kind of normal. We have a lot of products from all around the world getting into the European market. For cosmetics, it just followed suit, but it's not something that we can stand behind at all. So I was often known as the bubble burster. I often give people bad news. I'm often saying no to clients. It's not something I love doing, but you'll see why. So it's very important to know. And why I mentioned the placing on the market and the distributor is that even if the person who's importing these products, unless they have a responsible person, I'll get to this soon, the person who's importing is actually responsible for ensuring the compliance of the products on the EU market. And that's very important, because I think very few know. And they can get, as Marie mentioned yesterday, there will be more and more controls on cosmetic products, and there have been very, very few so far, because they've been small brands, small figures. But when they do come, it will be quite the carnage, I believe. So this is just an idea of the huge product dossier you have to have. So every single ingredient has to have all of their SDS, their safety data sheets, their analysis if necessary. All of these things have to be defined in the part A of your dossier. The part B will be usually a toxicologist, but can be a qualified assessor, will go through all of the first part of the product, of the dossier, which includes the test results, and I will go into the testing that is necessary. And they'll make an assessment. They'll also, say any label warnings you may need to put on the labels, which could include allergens, but also, keep away from children, the just standard stuff. That's so that you're sure you have a labeling that's correct. And this is one reason that I absolutely am sure that so many products are not compliant, because the labeling is just way off course. And then they approve, and then we're able to notify the product on the CPNP. Now, this CPSR, even this dossier, has to be kept up to date. So there are examples where an ingredient can become more restricted, or the restrictions on it will change, or it can be completely prohibited, and that is the brand's or the responsible person's responsibility to notify and to keep the file up to date, and that's not necessarily easy for a brand, so and let alone an importer, so it's very important to keep in mind. The person responsible for this is called the responsible person. It's not limited to cosmetics. It also applies to, I believe, foods. I know it applies to pet food. We tried a few years ago to import some. And the responsibilities are not only compiling the PIF, so that might be the manufacturer that does it as well, making sure that the safety assessment is included, the claims review. So if we want to make claims of any sort, which would be generally cosmetic claims, we'll get into that. It must be substantiated. The label reviews the labels have to be compliant, and that's something that even an importer, if they're importing products from the States and the labels are incorrect, could get into really big trouble. So it's just really important to know this. There's also, animal testing compliance, because we don't allow it, CMR, nano, things like that are really under the responsibility of the responsible person. So I can't stress enough the fact that if we are importing, you can naturally be the responsible person without possibly even knowing it. Product testing, and this is I find very interesting because there's a reason for all of these, obviously, and it's very interesting to see what a cosmetic product in Europe has to go through to get on the market, and it's really quite, I think it's quite relieving when we know that we use products on our body, on our skin, on our face, every day, or almost every day, and a lot of it too. You can speak about a massage oil that you'd use one time a week. It's really quite important to know that there aren't heavy metals in it, and that they're the patch test that it hasn't been considered irritant on the skin. So product stability is kind of the basic. You'd think it would be basic, but I've received samples from clients from CBD cosmetic brands where I remember I had a lovely white skirt on one day, and I opened a bomb and it just completely it completely exploded on my skirt because it was completely liquefied, and it was a warm day, like 30 degrees. But when you do stability testing, you're going up to 40 degrees, and so this is just kind of a shock signal that says to me, this is probably not a real cosmetic product. Microbiological testing, also very important. Preservative efficacy testing, so that's a challenge test. We introduce bacteria to make sure that they don't proliferate within the formula. And it's also quite important, not so much with oils, which there are a lot of the products on the market right now are oil-based, but as soon as we're in creams or emulsions, it's really quite important because you have, say, a jar where you're putting your fingers in every day, you're absolutely putting bacteria in it, and you're closing it up again. And then sometimes ocular irritation. The implications of this, and this is why we have so many gray zone, non-compliant products on the market, is that the process is lengthy. It takes 4 to 6 months for testing. It can take more. We're talking about administration too, and we are in France, so it takes a long time sometimes for administration. And the formulation is rarely under 4 months. So I'm talking about our private label clients for whom we formulate. We also do white label, but often they'll say, I'll just accept the first thing you give me. And then, of course, if you're creating your own brand, you're going to have back and forths, and it can take quite a while. There's ingredient sourcing, there's ingredient vetting. We're in a GMP situation, so it can take a long time. And this is why often clients would come to me and say, well, I need a product on the market tomorrow. What can you do for me? And I'd say, well, I nothing. I'm so sorry. Tomorrow it's just not possible. And so they will go and import or go to maybe one of the less scrupulous suppliers in Europe, and some have closed down since too. So it applies to all cosmetic products. We cannot get away from it, even if it's very natural. These are things I hear, so I think I'm probably speaking to some of your questions now. Even if it's very natural, does not mean it's good for your skin. My formula is very simple, doesn't make any difference really. We really have to. It might take a little bit less time for formulation, but every single ingredient has to be vetted and has to be deemed appropriate for the formula, and also the client experience has to be there. Just make sure I didn't. Yes. So, I'm glad you can actually almost see everything. This is what is permitted on the COSING. The COSING is a guideline, but most GMP labs will not want to, and I should just say this from the beginning, all cosmetics have to be GMP production in Europe. Okay, so there's no artisanal products that can actually be compliant on the market. And artisanally made, I mean. So CBD and CBG, since recently, are the only products that are allowed from the flower that are allowed to be in cosmetics. And CBG is very recent, actually. It wasn't even on the table at all before. There is another which is cannabis sativa leaf extract, and that's okay. I'm not quite sure what that is. Often I think that was what happened in 2020 that was brought onto the coasting list. And I think people kind of used it as I can do any cannabis extract. I can use it, I can say it's a leaf extract because it's kind of from the leaves and maybe there. So there were often cannabinoids in cosmetics via a leaf extract, which I think we're all in agreement, not very possible. So this is the evolution of the coasting entries. It has been authorized. I mentioned the EIHA because I think they had a huge hand in getting this approved for cosmetics when it was quite hard because the cosmetics world was not into pushing for this at all. And the CBD space didn't quite know how to push for this coasting. So I'm grateful to them. CBD now is authorized from flowers and roots. And CBG is also authorized. And these are the only two. So when we're talking about full spectrum, broad spectrum, really any other distillate, shatter, any other product is quite difficult because even if you have a very high level of cannabinoids, you will often have other cannabinoids. Of CBD, you will often have other cannabinoids, and cannabinoids still have that little annoying mention in the coasting, which is not impossible to work around, but it is very tricky because to prove that your product is not an extract, is not prepared from an extract or a tincture, believe me, it's very long. So then we have other products that come from hemp, but I'm really going to put a spotlight on the THC because this is something I need to I think whistleblow. Every time there's a legislational change or evolution with regards to how much THC can be in the final product. So in France it was 0, and now it's maybe 0.2, and there may be 0.3 in other regions. In cosmetics, there's 0. There's just 0. So there's no need to say, well, that's great, I can put some THC in my cosmetics, and maybe I'll be able to feel it through the skin, because often we have this kind of impression that we're going to be able to have the same results of a CBD oil in a CBD cosmetic. So THC is absolutely restricted or prohibited. However, because of the CBD space, I think that toxicologists are becoming aware that hemp seed oil also has THC traces, and often more. When you're talking about a whole formula, you'll have up to 99%. You can have often 70% or 60% hemp seed oil in your formula, and that will be where the traces will come from. So it's quite interesting because we as an industry are educating the toxicologists on the fact that, well, hemp seed oil, you've been validating that for years. And if you're really looking for traces of THC, it's probably likely more in there than it will be in your CBD isolate that will have very, very little. And also we usually put less than 1% in a formula. So the myth busting time, and I'm hoping this will be kind of straightforward because of what you know now. It is not easy to formulate with CBD in cosmetics. And I think we heard from Crystal Hemp yesterday about this. If you've worked with CBD before in oils, you have not worked with CBD in cosmetics. If you've not made cosmetics before, it really is an art and a science. Often people will say, well, I'll just use, I have really good olive oil and I have really good CBD, and I'll just put them together, and then can you test it for me? It's not cosmetic grade oil that you're using for your foods. It's really quite different, and I think that we tend to merge them together. And the formula will need to be stable over time and proven safe, obviously. I did add one picture there, and it was Marco Terranelli, I think, from yesterday, inspired me to using all these expressions, because often I will get people saying, I just want your base cream and I'm going to add CBD to it. So that's kind of tantamount to saying, I'm going to make a recipe and I'll just add some eggs at the end. It's not at all something that we can do, and it's why I get questions from consultants sometimes that are, how do you ensure the uniformity or the homogeneity of your formula? Because we often find that with products with CBD, depending on where you test from the cream, it's different. Well, that's because they took a bulk formula and they just stirred it in CBD, and that's just way too far from the cosmetics regulations. So adding CBD-based cream is not feasible. Adding CBD to a formula is possible, but usually we will always reformulate around the CBD, because to us it's not a coat of paint. It is kind of the motor in these products. The more CBD, the better. This is like the number one. I get people saying, well, it won't sell if it doesn't have a lot of CBD in it. And I tried a balm with like 1%. Actually, no, it was more like 15%. People say, I tried a balm with 15% and it did nothing. There are many reasons that could be. There are many reasons for that. I think the main one is that it does depend on the formulation. So if you have, it's a little bit hard to explain, and I'm not sure if I can do it myself, but to get the CBD into through your epidermis, you do need vehicles. So you need molecule vehicles. And if you use molecules like perhaps shea butter or something that is quite large, you will not get the CBD into your body. So you can put 15% in a balm if it has certain base ingredients, and it will all be left on your skin or just absolutely wasted. We find that the sweet spot is somewhere between 0.1 and 0.3%, so we're talking about really low, and this is why also it's very at odds with the CBD space that's kind of 10, 15, 20, 40. I just heard, wow. So it's an active ingredient, and very seldom in cosmetics are active ingredients above a percentage point, and very seldom, this is the next one I think, are they advertised at their concentration. So we're not looking for the same effects either. We can't say, well, CBD oils are kind of in the novel food space, so maybe I can get that effect through cosmetics. We're not looking for the same effects. We're not looking for health claims. I'd love that to be possible, and maybe it will be possible with dermocosmetics at some point. And I think it's actually beginning, but it's absolutely not possible with cosmetics. So there's a very specific way that it interacts with your skin and your system. But it's just nowhere near what happens when you have a sublingual oil or another way of consuming CBD. And I do think also we have to stop saying that we're going to use it as a replacement for oils or something else. It's a cosmetic. So really what we're looking for is this, skin tone. We're looking for skin conditioning, perhaps acne, which does go into the pharma, but things like this to have it's much more of a superficial, in the nice sense of the word, in the technical sense of the word, way to use CBD, and we shouldn't be looking for the same effects. CBD content is not a valued marketing argument. You really, I think there's maybe retinol would be the example, but there are very, very, very few cosmetics products that you will see that you will actually be looking at the percentage of an ingredient in this cosmetic product. That's one is kind of the secret of fabrication, and two, it's just not it's not cosmetics. Cosmetics are formulations, art and science and formulation, and you have the ingredients in descending order always on the label, but it would be very strange. It is very strange in the cosmetics world to have 500 milligrams CBD, even if it's a reasonable amount. And the other issue is, of course, when you put that on, you want to have as much as possible because that's what you think that the consumers are wanting, and that's what they are used to. But generally speaking, if you have a 30 milliliter serum and you have 0.1%, you're going to be putting 30 milligrams, and then of course it won't sell if we're looking at those kind of criteria. I do think this is a CBD industry-centric view, and it's destined to evolve as well. It's also the COA. I understand, of course, for distribution e-commerce sites that the COA is necessary. To sell a cosmetic product and even having like a QR code on it saying, here, find the COA, is very confusing to non-CBD space clients. It's kind of like saying, well, why would I need a certificate of analysis for my cosmetic product showing that there's no THC when there's no THC allowed in cosmetics to begin with? So I think that we have to stop this. I'm having a hard time getting my clients to do so, but it's slowly getting there. And the more very sophisticated actors that come into this space, the more we'll see that will decline, that will drop off, I think. It's not quick. We're very into speed in this industry, I think in any industry, but especially in this one. So much is happening at once and everyone wants to launch. So it's just not, a fast solution. Any change to any formula implies retesting. Even if we're talking about the perfume, often at least 30% of the tests will be necessary. Even if we're talking about, especially if we're talking about the CBD amount, I'll sometimes have questions like, can we do a 5%, a 2%, and a 7% of this cosmetic product, and each one is its own formula. And also, if you hear someone saying you don't need to register your products, really, it's everything. So it's all tested, but you don't need to register them. That's kind of a lie, because the registration takes about 20 minutes. I'll say 20 minutes. It's really not the time-consuming part. It's having all that you need in your dossier in order to register the product that is the time-consuming part. So that is a very frequent argument, actually, of my competitors. But it's really something to be aware of, because it generally means that the rest has not been done. And I think we just need to adjust our expectations, but it's really hard to do when there are so many great grey products, I'd say, on the market. And this is part of my job, is kind of trying to explain this. Packaging is not a detail. It can be in CBD oils. We all are used to the kind of DIN 18 CBD oil bottles and pipette. But I actually didn't cover that. But anyway, in the testing, one very important test is the packaging test. So it's to make sure that the packaging is compatible with the content. So there's no interaction between the contents and the container. And that is so important because, for example, we had one lately that compatible in a green PE tube because there's a little bit of sweet almond essential oil in it. And it shrunk the tube. So some clients will say, well, I don't really mind, I just need to get it on market even if it changes a little bit. That means that there's been interaction with content in container, and that could essentially be very damaging to many things, reputation, brand, and of course safety of the consumer. So packaging is not just a detail, and you can't really just accept the responsibility for it, because even though we are perhaps selling you, and even if we do a disclaimer saying that you have to accept, we wouldn't even do this, but you have to accept responsibility for it, as a GMP lab and with our credentials as a team, we would be ultimately responsible compared to a client who didn't know very much. You cannot get too creative with the labeling. Creative labeling is like the CBD space is so good at that. We've had CBD oils as pillowcase sprays and things like that. Cosmetics, it's very regulated like the rest of cosmetics. We cannot put animal testing, no animal testing on our boxes. And that's one of the most surprising ones to our clients, because they say, well, do we test on animals? No. Nobody tests on animals since 2013 in the EU. And in the same way, you can very, very seldom write cruelty-free, because that's kind of one of the norms. So you cannot claim respect of the law. And that's goes for does not contain THC as much as we want to write that on a packaging. No product should contain THC in cosmetics. So we really have to avoid from putting those. It's kind of just we say in French, le bâton pour se faire battre, the stick to be beaten with. You're just kind of saying, well, look, this is something that could eventually be in this kind of product, but mine doesn't have it. It's also very, I'll just go to these are the criteria. It's also very important not to have a product that next to another product could make that product look like it's not, how do I say this? Fairness, I think it would be fairness. So for example, if we put GMP manufacturing, which is the criteria, on a bottle, and then you have another product next to it that doesn't say GMP manufacturing, although that's not a criteria I think that consumers look for in cosmetics, it would insinuate that one does not have GMP manufacturing. Same thing with animals. If we put do not test on animals and you're in the store and you're comparing two, you're going to pick the one that says do not test on animals, but they all should be. So that's very important claims. Also be very careful not to go into the claims that we could think are cosmetic, like acne. Acne is a medical condition, so as soon as you go into that, you're going into at least a medical device, which is not necessarily a problem, but it's a whole other ballgame. And honesty, a little truthfulness. I mean, basically everything that we do see in the CBD oil space labeling, we cannot do for cosmetics. So it's really important, and I think that's what will really give away the products that are not compliant. And when this enforcement begins, they'll be looking at things like this first of all, because it just generally means that you haven't gone through the whole scheme. The last few, it's very hard to accept a CBD isolate, any CBD ingredient, but we're working with isolates into our lab. It has to be vetted. A few years ago, we'd have a lot of producers saying, I want to make my own line, and the storytelling, it needs to be my isolate, or it needs to be my full spectrum. And that's just really quite difficult. So we do try to vet. But if we have an SDS without toxicological information, if we have COA without metals or something like that, and it's really hard to get those, we will not accept that. So I'd say the other thing is that since we're on very low concentrations, it's not where you're going to be saving money. So I think that to trust the lab, whichever lab you're working with, that they are using an ingredient that is compliant, that is consistent, and that meets the criteria that should be there for cosmetics. Full spectrum is perhaps the best in CBD oils. The jury's still out. I like it, but in cosmetics, it's not allowed. So the entourage effect, again, we're not using the same principles of consumption, and we're not looking for the same effects. But the entourage effect will remain to be seen in cosmetics because there are a few mentions. So full spectrum, even if it's broad spectrum, you'll have other cannabinoids. So those are on the cannabinoids hosting entry. It's not really allowed. You'll also have other material. And for any ingredient that we're going to be using in the lab, we have to have the full composition of the ingredient. So that's quite important because we often don't know the 15% that is left of the distillate or other. But also, it has to be consistent, because any change to a formula, even if it's one ingredient, even if it's an active ingredient that changes a tiny fraction of a percentage, it could really throw off the formula, and you could have not the same product each time. And that's one of the staples of GMP cosmetics, or cosmetics the way that they should be, I think, is that they're really quite consistent over time. I have a friend in New York who has a a CBD beauty brand, and it's fabulous because it's a completely different world. But she says, you know, each batch of my cosmetics, I give it with a COA so that the people can see if they like this batch better because it has more THCV, or if they like this batch better because it has less of this. That just doesn't fly over here. It's a very interesting concept. I'm not sure if it's durable, but it just absolutely doesn't fly over here. So even if you want your products to be coherent across the line, you have CBD oils that are full spectrum, you want to have cosmetics that are full spectrum, it's just unfortunately not possible. And the other reason that we do shy away from full spectrum, am I way over time? Okay, thank you. Sorry, saw the clock. Is that they're full of terpenes, and terpenes are a buzzword. Terpenes are compounds that are very interesting and up to a certain level, and then very, very dangerous above a certain level. There are many that are also on the allergens list that are restricted under 0.001% in cosmetics. So with all of those in mind, with all those factors in mind, you can see why full spectrum, due to inconsistency and the rest of the composition, just is not a cosmetic ingredient here. This is problematic because even some of the major reports in Europe that came out talking about disrupting beauty and things like that would say, you know, full spectrum is luxury, and unfortunately full spectrum is not luxury in our case. And the last one, there's no need to think about selling CBD oils under cosmetics because of all the reasons I explained, but I think that people would say, well, it's a novel food, we need to get it out as something else, so we'll label it as a cosmetic, and that just shows a complete misunderstanding, I think a disinterest in the regulations that do exist that we need to work with. Aromatherapy, also to be avoided, but it's another story. So my conclusions are, please do it right, because we have the framework is there, and if we're going to have an industry that is responsible, that is considered valid and viable, we can't be putting products on the market like this that will ultimately degrade, you know, the reputation of our industry, but also the durability of the brand and the safety of the consumers. So our kind of 3 words are quality, traceability, and security, and I think they have all their place in the CBD space, and they should kind of go into other regions of the other product segments. That would be very good as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.